In this video, I will show you how to use the add-on ANIMAX version 2.0. After downloading the zip file of the add-on, open the Preferences. In the Add-on tab, click on Install. Then navigate to the zip file, then click on Install Add-on. Then you need to enable the add-on. In the add-on's preferences, we have 3 tabs. One for the presets, the second for the documentation, and the last one contains the links to our stores. Here you need to select the presets folder. We will talk about it later. After the add-on is successfully installed, you will find a new tab in the 3D view named ANIMAX. If Auto-Run Python Scripts is disabled, you will get this warning message, and you will have to enable it. Then you will need to click on the Load button. With ANIMAX you can animate and fracture objects. The animation operations are grouped in the Animate tab, and the fracturing operations are under the Fracture tab. Starting from the version 2.0, we have a new animation system powered by geometry nodes. In this new system we animate a group of instances. The source of instances could be the objects inside a collection, the characters of a text, or the output of a geometry node group. We call the group of instances an item. Let's start by adding a new item of the type collection. From the drop-down menu, you can select one of the existing collections. For the sake of demonstration, we will fracture the cube. In the mesh input, I will select the cube. In the mesh cutting section, I will load the cube's preset, then execute the cutting. And finally, in the mesh output, I will apply the result. I will name the new collection cubes, then press OK. You will find in the description some detailed tutorials in how to use the fracturing tools, since it's almost the same as the previous versions. Back to the Animate tab, I will select the new cubes collection. You can press this button to use the name of the collection as the name of the item. To animate the instances, we will go to the Effects section. We have different effects that we could choose from. Let's try the Transform effect. As you can see, there are a lot of parameters. We will explain everything in details later. But for the moment, let's load the Butterflies preset. You can press play to preview the animation. And don't forget to exclude the original collection. A preset in this new version is a combination of effects. We will explain it in details later. You can disable or enable any effect to see what it's doing. It's possible to hide the item in the viewport or render, just like regular objects. It's also possible to disable all the effects. Now let's take a look at the text item. We have some extra options related to text objects, like the content of the text, the size, the spacing, etc. You can extrude the text, and you can change the font. The orientation of the text objects is different than the other objects, because the up axis is Y. That's why the presets that starts with the word text means it works with the text items. You can filter the text presets. Here are some of the presets. The last type of items is node group. You can animate the instances outputted from a geometry node group. Let's create a new one. I will start by adding a plane. It will be the container of the node group. I will add a new one and give it a name. Now the most important thing is that the first geometry output must be instances. I will create some instances on points. Another important thing is not to use the input geometry as the points, it will not work. Instead, we will use a grid, and we will use a cube as the instance. From here you can expose any parameters you need. Back to ANIMAX. I will hide the plane and select the node group from the list. It's possible to modify the inputs from the add-ons panel. And like before, to animate the instances we can add some effects or load a preset. Now let's take a look at the effects panel. I will click on the plus button. As you can see, the add-on offers 12 different effects. We will explain them in detail later. For now we will use the transform effect as an example. In the effects section there are two main categories: offset and timing, and it's the same for all the effects. The second category is properties, where you can control the location, rotation, and scale of the instances, in addition to some extra options. It's a little bit different from an effect to another. We will start with the first category. There are 3 different methods for offsetting the animation. The first one offsets the objects based on their original position. I'll set the Z location to 3, so that we have something to work with. Now if we play the animation, the objects will move 3 blender units along the Z-axis. And the offset is along the X-axis. We can invert the direction. It's possible as well to offset the objects along the Y or Z axis, or based on their distance from the center. We can change the fall-off. If you use a very high value, the objects will have no offset. It's also possible to randomize the offset. You can use the random seed to change the randomization pattern. The second section is for adjusting the timing. If you enabled Control the Time, you will be able to control the timeline of the animation using the parameter control time. If you have multiple effects and you want to control their time globally, you can go to the item and enable control time and modify the time as you want. But keep in mind that the value here is the number of frame and not a factor from 0 to 1. Another very important thing is that the effects that have control time enabled will be ignored in the global time. Same thing for the effects that uses an effector as the offset method. Start frame represents the first frame of the animation. For example, if you set it to 10, the animation will start at the frame 10. Duration is the duration of the animation in frames. It's possible to invert the time. The animation will respect the start frame and duration, but it will play in reverse. It's possible to repeat the time. In this example, the animation will play 2 times in the duration of 48 frames. You can use the ping-pong option for a back and forth pattern. The last section is interpolation. We have 3 interpolation methods. The first one is function. It uses a math function to alter the time, and you have the choice between 15 available functions. And you can use the smooth step parameter to adjust the intensity of the animation. The second interpolation method is curve. Here you have full control over the time of the effect. Just make sure that the coordinate of the first point is 0, 0, and the second is 1, 1. You can even disable the clipping option and go beyond the range 0 to 1. The last method is ping pong. It takes the time back to the start. It's similar to an inverted U-curve. The next offsetting method is effector. You can drive the offset by the proximity to an object. So we don't need the timing section with this method. We need just to select the object. We will call it the effector, in our case it's the empty. And now if it get close to the objects of our collection, they will move up. It's possible to adjust the falloff in this mode. You can use the scale of the effector to set the maximum distance between the effector and the origin of the instances. And it's also possible to invert the animation, but keep in mind that the animation is triggered by the proximity of the effector to the original position of the instances. Or you can use the distance parameter. With the direction method, it's possible to offset the objects along the local x-axis of the effector. If the effector is a mesh or curve object, we can offset the instances based on their proximity to the points or the edges or the faces. The last offsetting method is texture. With this method it's possible to use a grayscale texture to drive the offset. The first option is gradient, which is a procedural gradient texture. You can change the rotation and the falloff. In addition, we have the timing and interpolation parameters. The second option is a procedural radial texture. The third option is a procedural noise texture. All the node parameters are exposed. The last option is an image texture. It's possible to use an image texture to drive the offset. These image textures are included with the add-on. Now let's take a look at the different effects that the add-on offers. We will start with the transform effect, since it's already in use. With this effect it's possible to change the transform of the instances. In the location panel, if you enable explode location, the distance between the objects will increase relative to their center. It's also possible to randomize the location using the randomize parameters. And you can use the random seed parameter to change the randomization pattern. If you have multiple effects, the behavior by default is to add the location value to the location of the previous effect. But if you enable replace location, the previous location will be replaced by this location. And the green plus icon changes to this orange icon. So you need to keep an eye on the icon to know if the effect is additive or not. For example, if we add a new transform effect, set its start frame to 50 and its Z location to 3. The instances will move 6 Blender units, 3 for the first effect, plus 3 for the second effect. But if we enable Replace Location and set the Z location to 1, the instances will move 3 units for the first effect, then we'll move to the Z location 1. This is especially useful to reset the location. You need just to set it to 0 to return to the original location. The same options are available for the rotation. For the scale, if you enable Uniform Scale, all the axes will have the same value. But if disabled, you can control the axis independently. It's also possible to randomize the scale. Finally, all the effects have this fade out option. If enabled, the scale of the instances decrease to 0. The next effect is Explode. It's a very simple physics simulation. If we play the animation, the objects will go down because of the force of gravity. From here you can change the gravity. We can give the objects some velocity, up and on the x-axis. To prolong the simulation time, increase the time multiplier from the extra options. If we randomize the location, we will have what looks like an explosion, hence the name of the effect. Then it's a matter of adjusting the parameters until you get something that you like. The next effect is Collapse. If you play the animation, nothing will happen, because you need to give the parameter collapse axis a value, and it will make the objects move to their center. In addition, you can offset the location. And you can rotate the objects around the center. This effect is useful for distributing the instances on a flat surface. The next effect is Robotic. You need to increase the location, or the rotation, in order to have some animation. The effect looks better with few objects and a long duration. Let's try it with the text, and with the same parameters. You can invert the time and adjust the parameters until you get something that looks nice. This effect is useful for adding what looks like a complicated robotic movement easily. The next effect is Empty. This effect has almost no parameters in the properties side. You can only fade out the objects, but it's useful for some use cases. All the effects so far are from the category Regular. The next category is Dependent, because these effects depends on an external object to work. The first effect in this list is Attract. We will need an object to act as the target. And if we play the animation, the objects will move to the origin of the target. You can use the factor to control how much the objects will travel. For example, if we reduce the factor to half, the objects will travel only halfway. It's possible to collapse the objects to the origin of the target object, using the parameter collapse axis. It's also possible to align an object to its trajectory. To explain this option, let's add a cone. Then create some copies. Then move them to a new collection, named cones. And I will replace the cubes collection by the cones. Now if we enable Align to Trajectory, the x-axis of the objects will be aligned to their trajectory. If we change the axis to z, it will look better for this example. It's also possible to control the interpolation using a curve. The next effect is Repulse. We will set the empty as the target. In this effect, the objects will avoid the target, contrarily to the previous effect. We can adjust the force, which is basically how much the objects will move. And we can adjust the distance parameter, which is the area of influence. The next effect is Follow Curve. In this effect, the objects follow the path of a curve. So, we will add a curve, then modify it in Edit mode. Then in the Location section, we will select the curve. When playing the animation, you can see how the objects follow the curve. It's possible to reverse the curve. And it's also possible to use the world location of the curve, and the objects will be attached to the curve. Using the number of turns parameter, you can make the objects orbit around the curve. 1 unit equals to a rotation by 360 degrees. In the rotation section, you can align the objects to the path of the curve. And the options are like the previous effects. The next effect is Orbit. With this effect, you can make the instances orbit around a chosen object. We will set the empty as the center object. Then in the angle, you can specify how much they will rotate around any axis. For example, 360 degrees is a full orbit. The next effect is Project. In this effect, the instances are projected on the surface of an object, or a collection of objects. We will use the monkey as the target object. The origin of the object is what collides with the target. Let's change the origin of the cones to be in the bottom. The effect is now clearer. Ray direction in the z-axis is -1, that means the negative z direction. And 1 means the positive z direction. And it's the same for all the axes. Ray length is the maximum distance for the instances to look for the target. You can project on a collection of objects if you want. You have the option to fade out the objects that failed to get projected. It's possible to align the instances with the normal of the face that the instance is projected on. And the options are like the previous effects. The last category of effects is generators. These effects are generated procedurally and can play virtually forever. The first effect is noise. It uses a noise texture under the hood. If we change the location, you can see the objects moving. The animation is not bound by the duration, but if you want the animation to stop by the end of the duration, just disable the parameter Continuous Animation. All the parameters of the noise texture are exposed on the UI. You can adjust them to your liking. It's also possible to animate the rotation and the scale. It's possible to align the rotation of the instances to their trajectory. The last effect is wave. It generates a wave animation. It's generated using a procedural wave texture. The parameters are similar to the noise effect. The real power of ANIMAX 2.0 is the ability to combine multiple effects. Let's have a little demonstration. I will start by adding a follow curve effect. Then adjust the parameters. And remember that the effect ends at the frame 66. Then I will add a transform effect. And set its start frame to 66, so it will play after the follow curve effect. Then I'll enable replace location to reset the position. And give it a nice interpolation. We can add another effect, say attract for example. And change its offset method to effector, and use the empty as the effector. And also as the target. Now the objects that get close to the empty will be affected by the attract effect. Just keep in mind that the order of the effects is very important. As you can see, the attract effect influences only the effects before it. This is the animation that we have so far. We can add an explode effect and change its parameters to look like an explosion. And change its start frame to play after the transform effect. Now, to reset the location and scale of the objects, we can add a transform effect. And set the start frame to be after the explode effect. And replace the location and replace the scale. And set the scale to 1. This is the final animation. Since the animation is 100% procedural, you can change all the parameters at any time. Now, let's take another example with the text. First, I will select the text item. Then add a transform effect. I need the text to start off screen. So I will set the start frame to -1 and the duration to 1. Then I will change the Y location. This is a little trick to set the initial transform. Then I will add a second transform effect. Then I will change the interpolation to back out. And enable replace location so that the text will start down, then go to its original location. I will add a third transform effect. I will set the start frame to 70. And the interpolation to back in. And give the Y location a value so that the text will go up and off screen. So we get this nice animation. But we could make it even more interesting by adding a wave effect. We will set its duration to 1, so it will start immediately. And adjust the Y location and some of the other parameters. Great! Let's give the letters some rotation, using the noise effect. And adjust the parameters a little bit. And this is the final animation. A very powerful feature in this update is the ability to synchronize multiple effects. I will load the preset disintegration too. As you can see, some effects have the timer icon. That means they are synchronized to another effect. Let's build a similar animation to understand how this feature works. I will start by adding a transform effect. You can double-click on the effect to rename it, and it's a good practice to give your effects meaningful names. Now, I will adjust the parameters. Looks good. Next, I will add a noise effect to introduce some random movement. Then I will adjust the parameters. As you can see, the two effects are not synchronized. To synchronize the second effect to the first, just click this button, then choose the ID of the effect. By ID, I mean the effects that is next to every effect's name. It's different for every effect. Now the two effects are perfectly synchronized, because the noise effect is copying the offset and the timing from the transform effect. But it's still possible to adjust the interpolation. For example, we could make the noise start a little bit early. Next, I will add another transform effect to introduce some random rotation. And I will synchronize it with the first effect. And give it a random rotation. And give it an interpolation similar to the noise effect. Then I will introduce some random scale, using yet another transform effect. And then I will synchronize it with the first effect. Then I will play with the scale parameters until I get something that I like. Then I will add a fade-out animation by following the same steps as before. But in the interpolation, I will adjust the curve to make the animation starts only in the second half. And this is what we have so far. Now, since all the effects are synchronized with the first effect, if we change the timing of the first effect, the rest will have the same timing. For example, if we invert the time in the first effect, the whole animation will be played in reverse. Same thing if we change any parameter in the offset panel. Now I will show you a couple of tricks. I will add a collapse effect, then move it up in the list to be the first effect. Make it start at frame -1 and set the duration to 1. Then I will collapse all the axes. And finally, I will enable fade out for the objects to start invisible. If we play the animation, we should get what looks like a particle effect. It's possible to loop the animation, so I will select the first transform effect, then I will multiply the duration and repeat time by 4. You can multiply by any number and make it play virtually forever. In this menu we have the available options. The first is duplicate. This operator creates a copy of the selected effect. The second option is copy. We have some extra options here. It's possible to copy the selected effect, only the enabled effects, or all the effects. Let's switch to the selected effect and copy the collapse effect. Now, to paste the copied effect, you can use the paste operator. Next option is save. It's for saving the effects as a new preset. It's the same as the plus button in the presets section. Next, we have some visibility options. It's possible to disable all the effects, or enable all the effects, or enable only the selected effect. Finally, we can use this operator to delete all the effects. This is the presets section. You can save a group of effects as a preset. You can save a preset from the options, or using the plus button in the presets section. But you have to select the presets folder first. You can do it from here, or from the add-ons preferences. In the Presets tab, click on the Folder button. Then, if it's your first time using the add-on, we recommend that you create a new folder. Otherwise, just select your Presets folder. The add-on will show you the number of available presets in that folder. And don't forget to save your preferences. Now, I will press the plus button, then give my new preset a name. Then press OK. You should find the new preset in the presets list. And it will have the C icon next to it, to indicate that it's a custom preset. The presets with the A icon are the ones included with the add-on. You can use these buttons to filter the presets. If you enable only the C button, you will get only the custom presets. Same thing with the built-in presets. You can also filter the presets by their names, using the search field. Now it's possible to use this custom preset with another item. If you want to add the effects of a preset to the existing effects, just hold Ctrl while pressing the load button. For example, I will add the butterflies effect. Then I will invert its time. Then I will load the explosion preset. but I will hold Ctrl while pressing the button. As you can see, the effects are added to the current effects. Then I will change the start frame of the explode effect. And I don't need to worry about the rotation, because it's synchronized with the explode effect. So we will have the butterflies effect, then the explosion effect. The effects that have the prefix text will work best with the text items, because the y-axis of the text is up. We have also some presets with the prefix PL, an abbreviation for particle-like. These presets looks like a particle system. For example, we have the black hole preset. The snow preset looks good. The sparks preset is really good as well. These presets are using the repeat time feature to prolong the animation. With the version 2.0, it's possible to animate the materials using ANIMAX. I have a transform effect applied to the cubes collection. I will open the shader editor, then select the cube, because it contains the material that I want to modify. Now, to create a link between the effects and the material, we will need an attribute node. Then I will connect the color sockets. In the name field I will type the ID of the effect. In my case it's FX. Make sure to write it in uppercase, or it will not work. If you are using Blender 3.4 or higher, you will need to change the type to instancer, and you are good to go. We have this gradient color, indicating that the material is reading the attribute FX that is stored on the instances. But if you are using Blender 3.2 or 3.3, you will need to set the type to geometry. And it's not working, because we have to enable realize instances in the item properties. Realize instances will impact the performance badly, especially with heavy scenes. So use it only when you have to animate the material on Blender 3.3 and below. We have this gradient, black means the initial transform of the object, and white means the final transform. So this attribute is a factor between 0 and 1 that represents the progression of the animation for every instance. We can do a lot with this attribute. For example, we could mix the shaders. Here I'm mixing these two shaders, and the factor is the attribute FX. As you can see, we have a transition between the two shaders. Now, I will duplicate the effect and change its location. In the shader editor, I will duplicate the mix shader and the attribute node. And I will change its name to FX2, because it's the ID of the second effect. And I will use its factor as the factor of the mix shader. And I will duplicate the diffuse shader and change the color to blue. Finally, I will change the start frame of the second effect to 48. And now we have this animation. It's a transition between three shaders, driven by the time of the effects. And we can do much more than that. For example, we could connect the color of the attribute with the color of the shader, then throw a color ramp in between, so now you can create any combination of colors you want. Now, let's try something different. I will change the offset method to Effector. And set the empty as the effector. Now, the color changes only in the area close to the empty. Then I will randomize the location a little bit. Then I will enable fade out. And we have this nice effect. This works also for multiple effects. For example, we can duplicate the effect, and add a new empty as the effector. But it's not affecting the shader for the moment. So I will duplicate these two nodes. Then add a Mix RGB node to mix the two color ramps. And the factor is the second attribute. Then I will change the colors to blue and white. And finally, I will change the name of the attribute to FX2. Now every effect applies a different color. You can even connect the color to the emission input and increase the strength. And you need to change the first color to black, so that the black area doesn't emit. And with bloom enabled, the effect is stronger. If you are into shader nodes, you will get a lot of fun with this. And that concludes our tutorial. Thanks for watching.